What's up everyone? My name is Caleb Brunco. I'm a photographer and filmmaker based here in South Florida. And today, I'm gonna try and figure out why Canon is still selling the 5D Mark IV for $2,500. Let's get into it. So I figured the best way to do this would be to compare the 5D Mark IV to the Canon EOS R6 because they both cost $2,500 and they both serve pretty much the same purpose. I bought the 5D Mark IV back in, I believe, summer of 2018 and it was my first professional camera body that I ever bought and loved it. I used it for years and I recently upgraded to the EOS R6. The 5D Mark IV was released in August of 2016, whereas the Canon EOS R6 was released in August of 2020. So much newer camera, but they still cost exactly the same amount of money currently. And I don't know why Canon is still charging $2,500 for the 5D Mark IV. It doesn't make any sense to me. It has almost none of the features that the R6 has. I guess first up, let's just talk about the camera bodies themselves. The 5D Mark IV is a DSLR which has a EF mount, which is like one of the most used mounts of any lens ever, which is cool, but also it doesn't, it's not very versatile for adapting it to other systems. Whereas the Canon R6 has a RF mount, which can then be adapted to anything, even EF, PL, well, anything, because it has such a short flange distance, because it's a mirrorless camera. The 5D Mark IV has a Digic 6 Plus processor, which was really good back in its day, but the R6 has the Digic X processor, which is just way better in every single way. I believe it's the same processor that's in the 1DX Mark III. The R6 has a variable angle touchscreen, which can move to whatever position you want, where the 5D Mark IV, it's just, the screen's just stuck to the back and you can't move it, and it makes it insanely hard to get different angle shots other than just right in front. The 5D has an SD card slot and a CF card slot, which sounds great because you can take two different types of media if you want the cheaper one or the faster one, but it doesn't let you write to both cards, which is really frustrating. Also, the SD slot in the 5D Mark IV is a UHS 1 slot, which I believe is limited to a V30 card. So it's pretty much unusable for most video situations. Whereas the R6 has dual UHS 2 SD card slots, which is awesome. You can't write video to both cards, but you can write photos to both cards, which is helpful. Wish you could write video to both cards, but we can't have everything, I guess. As far as ports go, they're both kind of lacking, to be honest. The R6 has a USB-C, which is nice for a variety of different connections, and the 5D has a like mini USB or something like that, which is not very great and doesn't instill a lot of confidence when you're plugging it in. But for HDMI, the 5D is actually a little better. It has a mini HDMI port where the R6 has a micro HDMI port. The sensors that are in these cameras are very different from each other. The 5D has a 30.4 megapixel full frame sensor where the R6 only has a 20.1 megapixel full frame sensor. Something to note though, the 5D Mark IV has an anti-aliasing filter in front of the sensor, which actually softens the image quite a bit. So if you compare side by side the R6 to the 5D Mark IV, they look pretty much exactly the same, even though the R6 has 10 megapixels less. Also, the sensor that is in the R6 is the same that is in the 1DX Mark III, which is Canon's flagship camera. So if it's good enough for a $6,500 camera, then it should be good enough for a $2,500 camera. The R6 also has in-body image stabilization up to 6 stops and then up to 8 stops, I believe, with certain RF lenses with IS, which is ridiculous. And the 5D has none of that. While the 5D Mark IV takes amazing photos, so does the R6, and it has way more features. The 5D Mark IV can shoot up to 7 frames a second, but you lose dual pixel autofocus, whereas the R6 can do 12 frames a second with the mechanical shutter and 20 frames a second with the electronic shutter. And you maintain full autofocus through all of these modes, which is bonkers. I get a lot of people saying that the 20 megapixels in the R6 is not enough for professional work, but keep in mind where these photos are going. Most of them are gonna go on social media, which is gonna get compressed down to like 1080p. And 20 megapixels is like 5,500 pixels wide, which is plenty. If you go up to 30 on the 5D, it's only like 6,700 wide. So you're actually you're not getting that much more resolution essentially. For the video specs, this is where the R6 just completely annihilates the 5D Mark IV and really proves itself as a hybrid camera, where the 5D Mark IV is absolutely not a hybrid camera. The R6 can shoot 4K up to 60 frames a second with no crop and full autofocus, whereas the 5D Mark IV can shoot 4K up to 30 frames a second, but has a massive crop of 1.7 times, and the file sizes are huge. Something to keep in mind as well is the 4K out of the EOS R6 is oversampled from its 5.5K sensor, which makes its 4K video insanely clean. For slow motion ability, the R6 can do 1080p up to 120 frames a second with full autofocus, so that's cool, where the 5D Mark IV can only do 720p up to 120 frames a second, and you completely lose autofocus, so it's not usable essentially. The R6 uses a 10-bit 422 codec shot in Canon log, so you get more dynamic range, whereas the 5D Mark IV uses an 8-bit 422 codec, and it does not have Canon log unless you send your camera into Canon and pay like $100 and they'll upgrade the sensor to a log sensor. From the testing I've done, the R6 has a pretty good low light performance and pretty clean shadows, even at higher ISOs, probably due to that 10-bit codec, where the 5D Mark IV, I feel like anytime I shoot over like 2500 ISO for like video, it's just a complete noisy mess and it's almost unusable. Or if you slightly underexpose your shot and try and drag the shadows up, it's just like noise central. It's insane. And it's probably due to that 8-bit codec, or it's due to the old processor from, what, 5 years ago? Since the R6 is a mirrorless camera, you can use the viewfinder while you're shooting video, whereas the 5D Mark IV, you can't. The 5D Mark IV has a dual pixel autofocus system, which works well, but it definitely shows its age. Whereas the EOS R6 has the new dual pixel AF2, which is really good, and it has phase tracking, eye tracking, animal eye tracking, and it works all the time. So why on earth is the 5D Mark IV the same price as the EOS R6? It's a great camera, but that was 5 years ago. I could 100% see a good argument for why you should get the 5D Mark IV in 2021 if it was like $1,500. But at the same price as the EOS R6, it makes no sense why you would pick that over the R6. So if you're thinking about getting a 5D Mark IV, let me know down in the comments why, because I genuinely want to know. It's still a great camera, but it's not $2,500 good. So with all that being said, that is gonna do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. It greatly helps me out. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.